Well, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, again. I'm Natasha Porizkova. I am one of the DEI managers here for Nika White Consulting, and I'm thrilled to have you in this space. So next week, we have this every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and next week we are back with Shaylin Jackson. She is going to cover the importance of mentorship, how it's different than sponsorship, and the necessity of authenticity in DEI. And Shaylin is the recent Chief Diversity Officer for the city of Oklahoma City or Tulsa. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she is a wonderful, and she will be here next Friday, March 5th, with Nika. The following week, we will have a special guest, Reverend Neil Thomas. We're going to discuss diversity and inclusivity, specifically throughout the LGBTQ community. He is a pastor, actually from a church back in Dallas, and I am very excited to have him here in a couple of weeks on March 12th. And then for those of you who are not yet aware, we have a book club coming up with Karen Catlin. That's going to be in April. There are a couple of dates. Lindsay, if you could drop those in the chat for me, as well as the sign up. Karen was one of our Intentional Conversations hosts last fall. We're very excited to have her in the book club with us, so make sure to sign up for that. And also very exciting news, our team is growing, we are expanding. If you're interested in applying and being a part of this team, apply. Lindsay will also drop in the link to the form so you can see all of the positions, more information on what is open and available. And we look forward to having you all hopefully apply. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest hosts for today, Michael Edward Stephens and Maylis Djikalou. So before I hand it over to them, I'm going to go ahead and give you their official bios. So first off, Michael. Michael spent over 10 years working in creative leadership positions for some of the world's most respected British brands. After a series of life-changing events, Michael diverted from this career path, becoming a mental health and LGBTQ plus advocate. He now runs Create Space, a bespoke workshop and retreat business promoting the importance of prioritizing self-care and personal growth alongside career ambition and professional development. On the side, Michael runs his own not-for-profit organization, We Create Space, providing monthly online well-being workshops within the LGBTQ plus communities. And Maylis. Maylis is a transformation coach and consultant who has worked at the intersection of creative and mental health industries, curating international events and strategic partnerships to promote well-being in the workplace as a competitive advantage. Her lived experience and previous struggles with addiction have inspired an ongoing journey in service of marginalized communities, creating safe spaces for courageous conversations and resources to optimize self-care. So with that, I am going to introduce Maylis and Michael. Hello, hello.
Hi, Natasha. How are you?
I am amazing. I'm so happy to have you. Yes. So to start, I know I gave everybody your bios, but I would love to hear, I take this word from you, Maylis, your trailers. What has led you to the work that you're doing now? And share a little bit about yourself with this community. So Maylis, let's start with you.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you know what, Natasha? Actually, the trailer is Michael's thing. He's the one who's been pushing it on a lot of our collaborators. So we all stole it now. But yeah, just to introduce myself. So as you mentioned already in the bio, so I'm Maylis. I'm a consultant and also a coach. And also I'm the program director of Create Space. And I guess the trailer of the story, an amazing place to start is the fact that, I've lived in the UK for 20 years now, but I was not born here. I actually came from a lovely country called the Ivory Coast. If anybody knows it, it's a French-speaking country. And it's just been a crazy journey, I think, since coming from there at a very young age. And I actually found myself really struggling with these kind of topics that we're actually working really closely with at the moment, which is intersectionality. And for me, it was so powerful to see that at a very young age, I could understand the inner conflict of, culture and just societies that kind of clashed. And for me, I straight on needed to find a way to cope. And addiction was my kind of avenue for that. And I guess it took a long time to find my way and to find who I truly was. And it took a lot of struggles to even understand who I really wanted to be. But it was on the back of a drug-induced psychosis that I ended up, I would say most people talk about the moment of clarity, their kind of epiphany. And for me, it actually ended up in prison because I got arrested for 6 months. And in that moment, I realized that not only that my life hadn't been that bad, but to a certain extent, everyone wanted the same things. We all wanted to be heard. We all wanted to kind of share part of our humanity with others. And I started listening and I started understanding how we create spaces for people to be seen. And for me, I got really lucky, to be honest, that I got out of that situation and managed to find my way in recovery. But on the back of that, it really fueled my journey and my purpose, so to speak, in the space that I do, the work that I do now. And it's just been amazing moving forward to utilize this lived experience, but also include learnings from everywhere, all of the cultural backgrounds, and even specifically the workspaces where I find myself in. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Maylis. And Mike.
So first things first, I still wasn't going to do any shout outs, but did I see your mum in the chat? Yeah.
She is here.
Hi, Natasha's mum, Emily. Yes. Love the support.
Yes, she is here.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, okay. So yeah, you mentioned it'd been radical or a series of life-changing events for me. It was quite a radical shift for me to move into this world that I'm in now. I did actually spend about 10 years working in fashion as well, design and travel in senior leadership positions, and actually found myself at the age 30 at what I thought was the pinnacle of my career, working for a brand that I'd always dreamed of. Everything on the outside looked perfect. On the inside, I was crumbling, and I actually ended up running myself into the ground and having a burnout. I'd never once prioritized my own health ahead of my career ambitions up until that, from an ongoing eating disorder, unaddressed anxiety, followed by this kind of occupational burnout. And after that, unfortunately, a period of depression. But I became far too good at internalizing all my own struggles, and until, I became physically, mentally and emotionally exhausted and was forced to deal with it. I'm very thankful actually that I had a support system around me that allowed me to deal with what unfolded, because many people don't. I mean, the LGBTQ statistics around mental health, but LGBTQ people are 3 times more likely to suffer from a mental health than regular straight people, and many suffer in silence, and that's really what led me to do the work that I'm doing today. Started by the determination to understand how I'd got myself into these situations and how to hopefully avoid getting into them again. That process and that journey that I went on is what really inspired me to create this business. But really, it's, I guess, an attempt to try and share some of that information and support that I wish I had had.
Yeah, thank you for both for being so open and vulnerable with us. Also, Michael, I always love that I can see your pup in the background. You just laid down.
You see? Yeah.
Love it. So now that we know a little bit about your backgrounds and what led you to where you are now, tell us about We Create Space and Create Space as an organization and what it's doing for people.
Maylis, shall I go first? Yeah. I set up this platform, really spent most of my life working through my internal issues alone. So these are struggles with my sexuality, mental health, identity, relationships. And I found that there was a lack of relevant preventative wellbeing solutions and spaces out there, but especially ones that resonated with me, because I felt like the only time I could seek support or help was in crisis. And really what we've tried to do with Create Space is really normalize the discussion of certain, I guess, stigmatized conversations around lived experiences. So the challenges that we face as a community, because I think it's important that we acknowledge the resilience that we've built to get to this point, but we also need to start kind of celebrating and developing our unique strengths as well. And like I said, addressing the unique needs of the community. So we try and bring a bit of fun and playfulness to this kind of growth work. It is serious, but we don't want it to be so heavy. So yeah, we try a bit of color to everything that we do. And I would describe us as kind of a self-empowerment platform for queer people, because it's by a team of LGBTQ professionals who deliver all of our workshops. And we actually just passed 1,000 workshop registrations, which is a big deal for us, given we're quite new. And yeah, we've learned a lot in the last few months, but it's just humbling to know that we've supported people. Maylis, anything to add from your side?
I mean, in terms of just what we found in the market, the fact that there was so much awareness, such a push for awareness, and as Michael mentioned, it seemed to be only this end of the line kind of service for crisis support, specifically when it comes to the LGBT community, around the needs of the LGBT community. And I think, having even worked in mental health for a long while, it was so strange to see that the conversation sometimes didn't think or feel the need to go that deep, because it may seem like on the outside people are doing fine, but until you ask the right questions, until you create spaces where they can actually explore, maybe then they can actually start uncovering what may be going wrong, but maybe what may be going right as well. I think mental health is such a expansive topic that sometimes we always think of mental ill health, where actually mental health is more about maintenance, it's more about self-awareness. There's so many important elements of mental health that individuals can feel empowered by, but creating spaces for conversation is where everything started. So for us, it was just coming into the middle of this space and adding something different. And as Michael said, from both our experiences, having gone through probably more end of the line mental health services and needing more acute help, it was important to notice that it can also feel quite isolating to go through this process. And so creating community around these needs and just being able to address them was really, really important.
And through one of our conversations, I think that you both mentioned that it's the programs and the opportunities are more about reflecting and thinking about the future as opposed to kind of simmering and stirring in the past. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I think, especially in my experience, when it comes to, my queer identity and LGBTQ plus family, it's a lot about thinking about the trauma from the past and not so much like looking ahead to the future. So could you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Maylis, do you want to go?
Yes. I mean, this is probably the default setting, isn't it? When we start to look at the past, we're always wondering, well, initially, who can I blame? Specifically, if something went wrong. I'm not sure about you, but I'm a massive self-blamer. But sometimes when I look at my past, I'm often thinking, where did I learn this from? And initially, in the earlier stages of my own self-development, I didn't have the tools necessarily to process things for myself. And I think sometimes a lot of work can seem to be stuck in the past, but when we're talking about our LGBTQ identities, it's super powerful to acknowledge that actually most of us are here now. There's a resilient power that lies in the process and the journey, and the simple fact that we find ourselves here and now means that given the right tools, given the opportunities and almost stable ground to reflect with more self-compassion without necessarily going into blaming and shaming, we can start to unpick the things that make us unique. And this is where it gets really juicy and interesting, because looking out to the world, we can see that a lot of us have been put in these positions where we had to observe, whether you're Black, whether you're gay, whether you're trans, you had to almost look at other people and maybe the majority and how they did things. And so in these observing positions, we got to learn how we shape who we want to be, and then infusing our own authentic self into that. So there's so much power in that. And staying in the past sometimes, I think, gives too much credit to other people rather than giving the credit to the individual who's survived and actually now wants to thrive, which is probably where we all want to be at some point.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
I think just to build on that, I think it is important probably to recognize as well, though, that the studies that have been done that are exploring the link between kind of mental ill health within the community, I guess they demonstrate that the root cause is often linked to an internal struggle with identity, and the shame that we experienced growing up has likely shaped the way that we view the world, each other, and ourselves. This, I guess, overwhelming struggle with identity is largely attributed sometimes to the challenges around love and acceptance that we wrestled with as a child. It is still important to back at points, but it's not becoming obsessed, like Maylis says, with finding someone to blame. It's about acknowledging, accepting, and actually be grateful you've been taken on this journey and given these kind of unique opportunities to, I guess, see the world a different way.
Yeah. And a lot of your work is making sure that when it comes to work and the workspace, that we're mentally healthy. Could you talk about maybe the current state of mental health and well-being at work? And I'm actually going to drop a poll for people to respond to see, do your organizations have an LGBTQ plus strategy in place? And that poll is live, so go ahead and respond. But I will pass it over to you, Michael and Maylis, to get to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I won't make any sweeping statements here. Everyone's probably reading or watching the news. But what we're seeing and hearing from our participants specifically is an ongoing struggle with change, uncertainty, and no one's exempt from this, from young people just starting their career all the way up to senior execs. We've all been stripped of our kind of routines, our communities, our usual coping mechanisms as well, whether they be healthy or unhealthy. And whether you're dealing with isolation or someone that's perhaps had to return home, look after your family, these are hugely triggering for most people, but especially for queer people, many of whom who have either isolation most of their life or have been rejected by their family of origin. So suddenly all this unprocessed adversity is coming to the surface, and there's actually nowhere to run to. You can no longer leave the house, you can't close the door and put on your work mask, as we call it, and everything is fine. So yeah, well-being at work is actually now just well-being at home, and they're one and the same thing. Our personal life is very much influencing how we show up in our professional life, and there's a lot going on.
Maylis, did you want to add anything? No?
I think he just landed that. I think this is the main quote when we speak to a lot of people. It's just emphasizing the fact that there's almost no place to hide anymore. And so we all have a duty to a certain extent to acknowledge the things that are emerging for people, specifically in the context of COVID. And as Michael said, isolation is such a key piece where not everybody is as fortunate to actually live with their family. And individuals, actually, participants we speak to who come on the program sometimes tell us that actually depression is coming up for them. This is something they've had to refer to professional help, get a therapist. And I'm not saying that in general we don't need to talk to therapists, because I think it's an amazing kind of experience for anyone. But just the fact that people are having to resort to these, resources now means that there's something we all need to be paying attention to.
Well, and reflecting back on our poll, we only had 6 people, so 26% say that their organization does have an LGBTQ strategy, and 17 people with 74% said no. So for any of you who said no, feel free to reach out to Michael and Maylis. I'm also dropping the link to their website in the chat. They have some free resources there and events coming up, so reach out to them. But moving on to the next question. So you've said that well-being, not in this conversation, but in a previous conversation we had, that well-being is ours to claim and own. But what role do our employers play in that?
Maylis, yeah.
Yeah, I want to take that. Sorry about that. I'm in a place where there's just I'm having to kind of move around, and I'm in East London at the moment. So if it ever gets noisy, you have to kind of excuse me for that.
That's okay.
It's such an interesting question, really, because there's this kind of polarity there where individuals are either saying the responsibility lies fully with employers, and other people are saying, well, individuals should be solely in charge of the mental health. But I think there's a bit of a balance there, because employers feel sometimes that they have a duty of care towards their staff members. And I think that's kind of right to a certain extent. But what we're seeing specifically in the UK, that in the past, there was such a massive emphasis on physical health. And I think now it's so important to counter into the fact that there's so many other aspects to look into, specifically mental health. And in terms of the roles, we've seen and heard from so many businesses that they're innovating and creating opportunities, whether through their e-learning platforms, or even already are establishing these kind of well-being strategies, and just offering essential tools for participants, I was going to say, but their staff members, to actually take ownership of that learning journey and just see what fits for them. But for us, it was really important to understand that beyond raising awareness, the key element for businesses is around culture. Because in my kind of work experience, I've gone through so many industries and places where ultimately we're all trying to have conversations, but it just seems like when the culture is not favorable of open dialogue, of vulnerability, of any, I would say, spaces for connection where people can just check in and feel like they are safe enough to ask or even say when they feel something is coming up for them, that is such an essential tool. And really, we're seeing that employers have a responsibility in almost exploring and getting curious about the barriers that sometimes prevent specific communities from accessing the things they need. And Michael and I were talking about the trans community that's often sometimes underrepresented, and it's all about creating spaces where each and everyone can be heard, and even people with disabilities as well. I think this is a major kind of factor, specifically during COVID, where we're wondering how these communities are, being supported throughout this transition. So there's, for us, when we were discussing this, it was also facilitating content and just being as open as possible and collaborating, I think, in the work that you do, Natasha, with Nika White, consulting around diversity and inclusion and seeing how we can find opportunities that are kind of tailor-made for specific groups, but also, I think in general, facilitating dialogue, and it sometimes starts from the top.
I would agree with all of that. I think looking at the barriers that are prohibiting certain groups from accessing the well-being, I guess accessing certain elements of well-being. So, for example, like I mentioned, the LGBTQ community, we know, are 3 times more likely to suffer from mental health conditions. So having a bespoke mental health strategy for that particular group is vital. And the same goes, like Maylis referred to, we know that physical health, medical treatment for whether it's people with disabilities or the trans community, there's certain barriers there. But then you've also got certain minority groups where social connection is lacking, and actually creating these intentional space where individuals can feel that social connection, which massively contributes to well-being in a holistic way. Yeah.
And since moving your retreats and events into the virtual space, you know, like all of us, we're managing these virtual communications. How do you make it feel as authentic and real as possible? I'll share, I participated in one of the We Create Space retreats. It was incredible. I left and I told everyone I know that they should look into it. And it was so authentic. And everyone in the group, I felt like I'd known for a long time. And it was weird to think, oh, I just met you yesterday, or I met you today. And so how are you able to create that connectivity in a virtual space?
Ooh, Maylis, you've got an interesting kind of stat about the kind of virtual connection, haven't you? And empathy.
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, did you notice my change of background? Like, I had to move rooms. So sorry. But it's yes, there was this piece of research that was talking about the fact that after, I think, 35 people in the space, in the virtual space, you tend to kind of lose that level of intimacy. And there was also another interesting kind of piece that I thought was worth mentioning, and this is someone called Dr. Paul Taylor Pitt, who's also a co-facilitator, and we were talking about I think he talked about cognitive resonance, and the fact that specifically in virtual spaces we also get to feel everything that happens. It's almost like transmitted, and we all have this sense of connectivity, and the real kind of value is in finding ways to tune that up a bit, or also kind of sensing it down when necessary. And for us, it was such an important piece to consider, because we wanted to attract as many people as possible, because we identified that there was such a need for the community to gather. But then how do we do that without people feeling either, you know, even more isolated, or even more kind of maybe sometimes feeling that they needed to hide? And we wanted to make the spaces as open as possible. And I would say that the way we've gone around it is using breakout rooms, which sounds like just like the silliest thing ever. But we felt like our roles as hosts really was just to set up the space and just let people go off somewhere and discuss, and try to have a rotation element as much as possible, so they could see different people, they can hear different perspectives. And I think this just was so essential. And I myself is something I've learned in I would say like recovery networks, where group sharing was just a massive piece. Like if you're not used to talking about your stuff, you're going to have to, because you're going to see other people do the same. And there was something so encouraging around that, to know that if I open up, or if I see someone else opening up, maybe I might just get the courage to do that. And for us, it was around just keeping those elements that made people feel that they were part of a bigger group, but also brought them back into more of an intimate space where maybe they can have the courage to share what was coming up for them.
Yeah. And unlike some other programs that get you to introduce yourself and what company you're from and the role that you have at the start, we don't ask anyone to do any of that. And that just removes that automatic kind of desire to put the mask on, because often we do resort to, you know, into our work identity, because that sometimes feels safer. But if you just kind of I guess don't even ask people to do that, then they have to sometimes look for other aspects of themselves, and that's kind of what we want individuals to do. It's about exploring other aspects of their identity that perhaps they have either suppressed, or that they perhaps just haven't given enough attention to. And really, that's what authenticity for us, that's the definition that we use. It's about embracing and acknowledging every meaningful aspect of yourself, and that's why we talk so much about identity, because identity is the aspects that we choose to find who we are. So yeah.
Well, and something that I was really appreciative of ahead of time you send, a pre-retreat materials, and it kind of outlines some information. And going into it, I was like, I don't know what to wear, which for me, I'm always thinking about that, especially now when I'm normally just in PJs or whatnot. And when it said, dress in comfortable clothes, it kind of gave me some of that freedom to be like, oh, I don't need to dress up from the top up, because that's usually what I do for work. And it was nice to just kind of like have that freeing experience to know that I can show up however I want to in this space, and it's encouraged. So I appreciated that. But you were talking about embracing all of our different selves. How do you incorporate intersectionality in this work, and how do you make it intersectional in general?
No, this is probably one of the key pillars for us in terms of just developing the programs. And we had to start at, understanding diversity and how it could be, shaped around what we do. I mean, Michael and I, as much as we've known each other for kind of, over 10 years, we couldn't be any more different. And it was about informing our worlds and really deciding what we wanted to see. And a lot of us have been in spaces where we wondered, my gosh, I've just heard from this person and I didn't see things this way until they spoke from that place of their own experience that is so unique to them, but I somehow felt included, because to a certain extent, human suffering is human suffering. And we're not trying to dissect and say that this person suffers more than you, but in all of us having a space to share, it's important that there's also a lot of strength to understand that there's so many strengths in differences. And for us, starting with in the COVID times and starting virtually was understanding that by default, we were probably going to create a global community, just because who came on board and the way they kind of advocated for the work that we would do. Say, well, if we're going to reach out to this global audience, how do we make them feel seen? Because these intersectional identities sometimes condition, how we show up. They inform how we see the world. And it's a space for reflection. And we wanted people who can speak into that, because it's a privilege now to have these virtual spaces where we can reach as far as possible and talk to people who potentially we would have never had access to. And for us, in terms of facilitating content that spoke to intersectionality, it was important to see throughout the process, in the way we curate the program, how can we find guest speakers who can also bring their piece and their lived experience and talk from, their own understanding of how they've been able to move through life, knowing that sometimes these intersectionality feeling isolated or never really part of, but how do they move through that now with the work that they're doing? How can they inspire other people? And also in terms of the mentors, LGBT mentors, the coaches, the therapists, everyone we worked with, really, we felt like there's no blanket solution and blanket community that will be just completely just disrespectful of the richness that we all bring forward. And so for us, it was about working with people who can speak from that place of authenticity and say, do you know what? I've been through this. This is why, I use breathing to kind of move through life. This is and informed from a very honest place, and playing around and digging out authenticity or understanding diversity and how that can show up for us in the work that we do was so interesting, because we tried to approach it as best as we could from a place of curiosity.
It's beautiful. Lenroy said, "You have a point, Maylis," and I agree with that. Michael, did you want to add anything?
No, I was just going to actually respond to a question that was in the chat, which was talking about organizations often talk about creating spaces to bring your kind of authentic self to work. And Alfred said, could you speak to the danger and harm when the talk isn't authentic? I think, yeah, we often, it's quite like a commonly heard phrase now, isn't it? bring your authentic self, or bring your full self, or come as you are. But there's so much more to it. And, you know, as we've as Maylis alluded to, in terms of these intersectional identities, some aspects that we're born with, like race, others are developed, like our profession or our role within society. But we are, in fact, different identities all at the same time, lots of different identities. So I don't know whether workplaces are really prepared for us to bring all of these different identities to work, or whether it's you can bring them as long as they still align with our kind of approach to behavior in, you know, the workplace. So especially, I guess, when those within the LGBTQ community, large parts of our lives either suppress aspects of ourselves, or I guess just living according to who we think to be, out of fear of rejection by either our families or society. So it's going to take more than someone just saying "come as you are" to convince us that actually that's safe, because naturally this does just evolve, and it doing survival in the workplace, really. And authenticity requires us to have a critical eye and reveal these aspects that perhaps we've suppressed. And it's not just a one-time thing. It's not like I can just wake up in the morning and be like, I'm going to come as I am now. This is an ongoing process of continuously removing the mask, I would say. And that's kind of important for leaders to understand as well, that this isn't just something that they can say and support. It needs to be demonstrated, really. And we need to see these different aspects of our leaders in order to feel safe enough to do the same ourselves.
You're absolutely right. Saying "come as you are," this is a safe space, be your authentic self, is a lot easier to just say than actually demonstrate and advocate and make that safe space. Maylis, did you have something you wanted to?
No, I was just nodding to what you were both saying, because I know we all have heard that. And, you know, because Michael talked about survival, and a lot of the times when we look at individuals who may have had, you know, kind of faced adversity in their childhood, you do have individuals who grow up to be kind of very almost hyper vigilant. And so the talk is never enough. We're actually sensing things with our bodies. We're actually watching things. We're watching what often most people can't see, because we've had to read between the lines in order to survive and know where we feel safe and not safe. And so we're very good at kind of digesting and extracting truth that feels like real truth. And when we know that we're welcome, we truly know that we're welcome. And so I think it takes a lot of conversation, but also action is probably the best way we can understand that and see people live by these values that we often see companies kind of pushing out. It's like, great, but actually how have you been putting that into practice? It's great that you believe in that, but what have you got to show for it? And it's not to shame people and say that they can't begin, but if you begin, you need to begin intentionally, and then actually track how you're progressing and not be afraid to receive tough feedback, because that's where, you know, the real growth happens, when we can all be transparent with what's working and not working.
I agree. And we have had a number of questions come through. We'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll move into the question section. But if you want to drop any more for Michael and Maylis, feel free to do so. And I wanted to ask a little bit about the people and the speakers that you partner with. How do you decide, or what's the process to bring in, because you have such a robust network of people that you've brought to this community. And I love going through your website because it's just a beautiful tapestry of humans. And so how do you go about that?
It's quite weird. It's like we attract them, and it's I don't know. We just seem to come across people, and then they would recommend people, and then it happened very organically actually. Because when we initially kind of started working on the program pre-COVID, we were talking to individuals about delivering our program in person, and then when we decided to move it virtually, we had to find a whole new team. And really, that is what opened up the world of possibilities, because we started working with individuals in Australia and then in Oman, and just really enjoyed the fact that we could travel or take people around the world while still remaining in your own homes. Obviously, for us, we've talked about it, diversity is hugely important, just not a fluffy thing, but as a fundamental pillar in everything that we do. It's about individuals who have that lived experience, who can provide the information and the tools that they have found most useful on their own journeys. And that's, I guess, links back into this authenticity part, because it's not just theoretical. It's people who have actually put into practice and who are living by their purpose.
And I think, just to complete what Michael was saying, is like a lot of the time we've had people who participated on one of the events and kind of say, I've got something to give back. And a lot of the time we're actually just overwhelmed, thinking, wait, I mean, I knew people were nice, but sometimes you're actually just shocked by the fact that people genuinely want to give back when they feel like they've received something that benefited them. And so for us, in the process of just even doing a lot of the sessions, Natasha, you know that when we begin, we're always grounding people, either meditating or breathing, so making people feel at ease, so that if they do open up, then there's more of a kind of smoother conduit to kind of, navigating what's coming up. And maybe this is the magic, where people are in the comfort of their own homes and they can share more openly. And then because they've shared, maybe they feel some kind of tie to us and saying, wow, I opened up, maybe I can do more. And we've just been so, just excited to see some of these individuals unravel with their own ideas, but getting to dig a bit deeper in what they've done for the community or how they've been showing up in the world and serving. For us, all we can really do is amplify their voices, because as they do for us, they might just inspire another person to show up again and say, I've got this perspective I'd like us to explore. And as a community, I don't think we're ever going to stop learning, because we're seeing how diverse we are. And so if everybody has something to contribute, this is where, the power is in that unity, but really going through and digging through the dirt and saying, wow, where is the true beauty? What's the resilient? What are the stories? And how can we share that with each and every one of us? And eventually that's the chain reaction that maybe we want to see in the world, freeing people and just accepting that it's all right to be yourself and it's okay. And maybe that just one experience that you felt at the time was a difficult thing might free someone up moving forward and help them see their life differently.
Yeah. And we see this actually on every program, people at different stages of their own journey, and who are able to either kind of support those who are just starting out, or offer some kind of, I guess it's not always advice, it's just an ear, just listen. And I think there's just an element of compassion that we all kind of, I guess, feeling right now, but especially when you're kind of listening to people's stories, and what they're going through.
Well, and we have Loris in the chat. He let us know that he attended a couple of your workshops and he's excited to attend again next month. And I know even for myself, I think immediately after I reached out to both of you and I said, how can I help further this mission and this work? And I know some of my friends that I made, and I did use the word friends. I already created friends from the workshop, even though it was only a couple of weeks ago. And they too said, I'm going to help out with the team because I'm so passionate about this work and I want to grow it. And so you've created this giant link that's really, really beautiful. So
yeah,
well,
I
we
mean,
will move
Natasha,
over.
I'm going to be honest with you. I wouldn't through the last 12 months without the people that I've met through programs. They have been my support network over the last year, and it's just amazing. Actually, like you said, it doesn't. You don't think that it's possible to build those connections, but yeah, I've been isolated from my friends for a year now, and through these programs, I've met individuals that have, yeah, just really given me the time and space and showed me that support.
Lovely. And Rachel said in the chat, the magic of reciprocity, which I loved. But we will go ahead and move to questions because we've had a number of them come in. We had a question from Judaline. Hello, Judaline. She's also in the UK with all of you. When you go to parties, remember when we were able to do that, go to parties, how often do people ask what you do, the measurement of your worth to society? So maybe this is more of a question for people in the chat. How often were you asking people, what is it that you do, instead of saying, what is it you're passionate about? What are your hobbies? So that's a question for all of you in attendance to let us know if that was something you were asking often. This next question was from Katie. Hello, Katie. She is in Chicago, I know that. And her question is, how do you create spaces that support intersectional identities within the LGBTQ plus community? So disabled, BIPOC, women, etc. We touched a little bit on this, but I'd love to hear a little more.
Michael?
Yeah, I think you have to be intentional with what you're trying to achieve, and that's, inclusivity doesn't necessarily always have impact, and we try and find that balance. So certain workshops we try and be as inclusive as possible, but then others we try and be more targeted and specific, because with that, individuals feel safer to show up, to share kind of aspects of themselves, and also get to learn from others who have had shared similar experiences. So I think it's not always about trying to provide for everyone. It's about just being intentional with who you're trying to serve and what parts of the community, because you could end up making it accessible to everyone, but not really making it relevant to anyone. So I think that's my advice.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think on top of that, it was also just like surrounding yourself with people who can kind of play into some of your blind spots. And I think for Michael and I, we were very upfront with, what we were good at, what we could do, what we couldn't do, where we could see, where we couldn't see. And along the way, we weren't really afraid to go and have conversations with people who told us, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we had to understand as well that we have with the virtual space, because there's so much more we'd like to do, but we're not able to do. And we have to find that balance. And again, find people who can evangelize, but then bring other people who can inform new perspectives and new ways of doing things. So I would say reaching out to as many people as possible who may have a different understanding, or even may bring another kind of way of seeing things and facilitating spaces for other people. I think that's always a bonus.
Yeah, and I mean, as a white gay male, I have a lot of privilege. So acknowledging that, and actually, sometimes I do get it, and actually, as Maylis says, just putting yourself in those quite awkward conversations, I've learned so much, and we've actually been able to be more tailored and have more impact, because actually what I think someone needs is the total opposite of what they actually need, and often, as we said, it's just about listening and putting that into practice after you've heard it, not just assuming.
We have another great question that came from Katie. She said, I love the idea of pointing people towards resources, so self-guided education, therapy, etc. In addition to that, or as a place to start the mental health journey, how can peers and colleagues create brave spaces of transparency and support? How can business resource groups create those spaces?
I mean, as we were kind of discussing earlier, it maybe call me like, foolish, but I've found that the real power and the true transformation starts when people start to speak. And sometimes it may not be in a bigger group already, but I was speaking to someone who was talking about these kind of like systems of buddying individuals with one another, so they can feel like, okay, if I speak to one person, then eventually we together can bring this forward to other people. It's finding a way of support. Support networks aren't always externalized. They can be created and tailored to individuals' needs. And it's about really understanding the makeup of your own staff and that demographic. And I guess finding individuals who can, I would say, maneuver and really find ways to get closer, to listen, to understand, to begin, because not everybody is necessarily kind of gifted with this, intuition of what's needed, but there always needs, to a certain extent, to have these frontline individuals who aren't afraid to kind of step across that line, to engage really deeply and grab the information and bring it back to individuals who can actually process it. So I can't say that there's like one solution that fits all, because in our work with Michael, we've seen businesses adopt so many different approaches. Some people have a very kind of relaxed way of giving the freedom to individuals to kind of choose what they need and even pay for it and say, if that's what you feel is right for you, do it. Others are saying, well, we can't kind of offer services for one group and kind of not look after the other group. So what we offer has to be kind of across the board, speak to everyone. I think the real power is in reflecting back on what you're already doing and really checking in and getting as much feedback as you can to see, well, how can you improve and how impactful is it really so far? So it's a mixed question, I say, and I'm not sure even if I have the right answer, but my kind of thing, being French and all, in African, we like to chat everything through. It's just like, if there's a problem, talk about it. If there's something, someone needs to address something, talk about it. And it's always my first gateway to kind of express whatever's going on. I don't know about you, Michael. What did you have in mind?
I actually can't do two things at once. And when Natasha was asking the question, I was reading the chat. So I really enjoyed listening. I didn't know what the question was.
Well, I know you mentioned in your response the inability, and this is really key, to not have a cookie cutter one size fits all approach, especially when it comes to the different intersections of being LGBTQ, potentially disabled, women, people of color, all of the different elements. It's impossible to have a one way that's going to fit for everyone. And I know that's a big part of the programs that you all put together, is that it's not one and the same. It changes and it shifts and it's fluid.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think specifically even around the topics we choose to explore, we felt like certain topics, exploring masculinity, exploring femininity, exploring even what it's like to be in a queer body. We try to bring people who can speak to these specifics without necessarily saying that everyone else is excluded, but we can always come in and listen. I think for us, it was about making space for curiosity. And even if we don't identify, and I think that's sometimes where we hit a roadblock, is people think that we have to identify in order to show up. I don't think that's right. I think nowadays our networks have completely changed. I don't know about you, Natasha, and Michael talked about this. I know I don't speak to the same people I used to, pre-COVID to now. And some of the people I speak to, I couldn't even have imagined kind of starting a conversation with them before. And they don't come from the same background as me. They don't have the same lived experience, but it was so important to actually listen and hear their experience. So the variety of content for us was about bringing in the audience from all different parts of the world and all different parts of the spectrum. But again, getting them to give their voice and say, how does this Black woman speaking about her, bisexuality and even her queerness, how does that relate to your experience? Because ultimately, I think the real thread is we all speak on an emotional level and we understand emotions, and these kind of ways of seeing the world, all of our intersectional identities are interesting frames, but it's not everything, because we all feel the same, we all bleed the same. And so if we provide that variety, it gives people the space to explore in a really unique way, and then leave others with information that they can then either research or just apply if it fits.
Yeah, I think building a culture of curiosity is important. Not just saying, oh, well, that doesn't relate to me, because actually that relatability is what you need to work on. That's what compassion is, and compassionate leadership. It's it's emotional intelligence. It does involve being aware of your kind of thoughts, behaviors, beliefs, and so mental health
biases.
Yeah, exactly. So mental health, I know a lot of people don't like talking about mental health because it sounds as if there's something wrong or there's something to fix, but actually we all need to work on our mental health all the time, and you can do that through, I guess, understanding what others are going through as well.
Well, we have one more question. We're almost out of time, so we'll get to this one really quickly. This one was actually from Nika, and she said, is there really such a thing as quote unquote safe space when considering dominant spaces that declare default safety without knowledge of what could potentially cause harm for those in the space? For instance, we don't always know what triggers or causes harm in individuals.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And we do use the term safe space a lot, but we try to use more the term brave spaces, because it's the conversations that we're trying to instigate through that creation of people, as well as I guess the detail that goes into the planning as well, and making sure that the safeguarding is there, as well as the actual structure, the incorporation of holistic practices that allows people to approach these conversations from a more grounded place. So to avoid, getting worked up potentially, but also, I guess, having the right number of people is so important to ensure that it's not beyond the facilitator's control as well. I totally agree that we don't know what would trigger somebody else. We don't know everyone's story, but would you add anything, Maylis?
No, I think for us, it's just, again, touching on the importance of the safeguarding aspect, because we know that we're not crisis support. And so we know that we have limitations. And in as much as we try to kind of dig into difficult conversations, difficult topics, we warn people in advance that, hey, this might be tricky. We understand that you're coming in this space. There's some strangers that, people that you've probably never met before. So if you don't feel comfortable going in the breakout, you can hang back with us. I think it's giving the option and making that conversational and running throughout the process, from the beginning when people register to the end of the event, and checking in with people, because we never know what might come up. But I think for us, the idea of safety is just creating an opportunity where people feel like if they wanted to access help, if they wanted to discuss, there is a person who can take the time out to create that element of safety to a certain extent to support what's coming up for them.
Beautiful. Time, is there any piece of advice or wisdom that you'd like to leave before we close here today? Anything at all?
I'll just sign up to a workshop.
Yes, do that. Yes, you will all get the follow-up email that will have the different ways to connect with Michael and Maylis when we create space, and all the different retreats and events and workshops they have. So please keep an eye out for that. And thank you everyone for joining. Yes, well, everybody, thank you so much. No matter where in the world you are, we're so thankful and appreciative to have you here. Thank you, Maylis and Michael. It was so lovely to have you, and enjoy the rest of your days and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you all. So great to be here.
Bye, everyone.
Natasha.